with Iron Man working feverishly to undo the damage done by Orchis to all of mutant kind at the Hellfire Gala, what has led Iron Man ally Ironheart to go to war with Iron Man's new wife, Emma Frost? What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, today's video, I'm going to be talking about Invincible Iron Man number 12, written by Gerry Duggan, with art by Ig Huara, and color by Brian Valenza. Why is Riri Williams, aka Ironheart, engaged in what is effectively mental mortal combat with Iron Man's new wife, Emma Frost, or rather her alias, Hazel Kendall? Honestly, it all boils down to one big misunderstanding, as it often does with superheroes. Well, the whole thing here is that Tony just forgot to tell Riri what was going on. She doesn't know the skinny on all this. She is at least aware that he and Hazel Kendall are married, but once she realizes who Hazel Kendall truly is, that she is in fact Emma Frost, red flags for her start going up everywhere because she knows enough about mutant kind to know who Emma Frost is and is aware of what she's capable of, and also she is sadly been bamboozled by all the bad PR that Emma Frost has gotten thanks to Orchis, which I'm not gonna lie, I find incredibly weird because I feel like Ironheart would have been able to suss this out for herself, considering the fact that it is a well-documented thing about Ironheart that she doesn't exactly take news from one particular source. She technically takes it in from all sources, but one could make the argument that maybe it's because Orchis has spread all this news around across so many different media channels that maybe she had no choice but to just accept it as what it was. It's a whole other story altogether. I'm not gonna harp on this one. But the thing about Riri Williams, and I know some people are thinking that, oh, how is she gonna be able to go toe-to-toe with Emma Frost? Well, one thing you might have not been keeping up with is that during the Christopher Cantwell run of Iron Man, we discovered that Riri Williams had gained access to the Mandarin's 10 rings, one of which gives her the ability to affect telepathy no differently than a mutant would be able to. Now, if you're wondering how and why all this came into play, it was largely because when, during that run, Tony Stark was trying to amass all of the weapons of mass destruction in the Marvel Comics universe so that he could hide them away from the rest of the world to keep them out of villainous hands, more or less, during that time, Riri, who was in disguise as the Cobalt Man, she swooped in and bought the rings out from under Tony Stark. And we even saw earlier in Gerry Duggan's Invincible Iron Man series that Tony, while it seemed like he had come to grips with Riri having possession of the 10 rings, something that he is very familiar with because he has gone to war with the Mandarin over the years, going back to some of his earliest comics. So of course, yeah, he's not gonna be too crazy about Riri possessing a set of weapons that is as powerful as this because he's just afraid that she's gonna use them for the wrong ends. And while that has been a plot point that's been kind of hinted at and teased at, I kind of appreciate the fact that that idea is largely kind of dismissed in Gerry Duggan's Invincible Iron Man series. It's stated and shown that Riri knows what she's doing. She's taken the time to properly test all of this, and she's trying to use them as responsibly as possible, even using the Mandarin rings in some ways that Tony has never even seen the Mandarin use before. All in all, she has the ability to go toe-to-toe with Emma Frost. Now, granted, we never get to really see what the ultimate outcome of this fight is going to be, because in order for all this to take place, that means Emma Frost has to take off her power inhibiting ring that has effectively allowed her to go unnoticed by even the likes of X-Men villain Fei Long. She has literally stood right next to him and he has no idea that she's a mutant because any mutant detection technology that he could possibly keep on him at any time, it's unable to recognize her X gene signature. So when all this is going on initially during this misunderstanding between Riri and Emma Frost, because Emma doesn't really know who Riri is and is wondering why she's trying to get inside the Hellfire Club, and she's basically kind of playing, as Tony says in the narration of this, she's basically playing bouncer at the door of the Hellfire Club right now. Well, yeah, you could make the argument Emma could have just mentally reached out to Tony. Once again, she has on the inhibitor ring, so she wouldn't be able to do that without giving herself up. And Kingpin did allow Orchis to put all sorts of mutant detection devices all over the place, so once again, that is kind of untenable at this point for her to be able to take that ring off. So the fact that she took it off at all lets you know that she perceived Riri as an actual threat. But I would like to believe that maybe Tony would have told her, Emma Frost, that Riri was going to show up and maybe said, hey, this young black girl is going to show up. She's going to ask to come in. She's not very personable with people, so just kind of know that y'all are made for each other. Because honestly, I feel like Emma and Riri would get along quite well if they actually sat down and got to know one another. They are both equally skilled in the art of shade fu. But no, none of this happens. It's all a big misunderstanding, and you would imagine if Tony forgot to tell what is effectively one of his closest allies outside of Rhodey, you would imagine that, yeah, if he forgot to tell Riri that he got married, he probably would forget to tell Emma that Riri was coming around, which says a lot about their relationship as of late. But once again, Iron Man's fighting a whole war here, so he's kind of preoccupied right now. So I totally get it. It's weird, but I'll just run with it. Because comic books. The reason why we don't get to see how this fight plays out entirely is because, as I mentioned earlier, the Orchis organization has planted detectors around the Hellfire Club. So the moment that Emma took the ring off, Sentinels were alerted and dispatched to the Hellfire Club. And it's one of those situations where they kind of have to just let their beef go and then suddenly realize, oh, hey, we're on the same side. And it's a whole typical superhero dust up. Two superheroes are fighting for no good reason because they could have just as easily have spoken to one another and everything would have been right as rain. Of course, it must be Wednesday or Tuesday if you're DC Comics. But anyway, this Sentinel interruption is actually a good thing because it shows us what Riri has been working on outside of learning how to wield the 10 rings. We discover that she's actually been messing around with PEM particles, something we've actually seen kind of spreading more out into the wild as of late. It's something that's actually been going on for a while, but like we've seen PEM particles pop up more than a few times on the X-Men side of things, especially over in Al Ewing's Sword series. It was actually used to disguise Abigail Brand so that she could sneak around on one of Orchis's bases to get to Henry Peter Gyrich right before she unalived him. That said, we've learned that Riri is using the PEM particles in order to combat Sentinels, shrinking them down to Ant-Man size. This is actually a pretty cool deal because it makes you wonder why the X-Men have never called Ant-Man before, because it seems like something that would be pretty useful if you're regularly fighting robots the size of skyscrapers, but what do I know? Either way, Riri is able to shrink a Sentinel that is literally the size of a building down to the size of an ant and squashes it. This is a secret but yet not so secret weapon that Tony is going to try to use against all of Orchis's Sentinels, and it just so happens that Riri has been working on a method to make sure that they have plenty of PEM particles in order to take all those Sentinels down. Now, granted, their numbers may be off a little bit because, as we noted in the Children of the Vault series, that Orchis has the Reforge, or at least they had the Reforge, and that forge at the time would allow them to unleash 1,000 Sentinels per hour. Initially, before the Hellfire Gala, they only had like a dozen, if even that. But now they have infinitely more Sentinels, but I would imagine that whole 1,000 Sentinels per hour is out the window, unless they build another forge. And as we know, it took them quite a while to do that because the Orchis forge was originally destroyed in House of X number 4. So the fact that it took about roughly almost the time until they were ready to tell a second House of X and Powers of 10 story, that being the fall of the House of X, Rise of the Powers of 10. Yeah, that one. Yes. So the fact that it took this long, it took about roughly 4 years to get to that point, I think it's safe to say they're not going to build one anytime soon. So maybe this will work out after all. But that's not the only reason why Tony Stark is calling in a favor from Riri. It's because he also wants her to help him out with the construction of what appears to be some type of setup of vehicles, some type of ships that are referred to, likely spaceships, something that would be able to house hundreds of thousands and maybe even in the realm of millions of mutants. Now, what he's referring to sounds like he wants Riri to build these ships to fly to Araco and then transport back all of the mutants from that planet. And this kind of another little wrinkle that might be in Tony's plan is that I don't know if he's aware that there's a whole mutant civil war going on Araco right now between Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants and Genesis and her Amenthi Horde, as well as, well, what was left initially of her, 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which now she doesn't have any. So I guess technically that's off the board. But Storm and Genesis are about to wage war with one another. So maybe by the time that all this is completed, maybe the war between Genesis and Storm will be over. But yeah, it's one of those things I feel like maybe Tony's not up to speed on a lot of information, but it may be that he is, and he's just planning for the very right set of things to play off to create the perfect scenario for his plan to work. That is what I'm gonna go with here. He's playing 5D Wizards chess right now, so he's also sending Riri to work with a character that, if you are only familiar with the MCU side of things, a character we saw in Avengers Infinity War, a character by the name of Atri. She's going to be working with this dwarf king of sorts in order to facilitate being able to create a huge amount of these ships to ensure they can transport the most mutants humanly possible. So there's that. The other thing that we are going to get to here is the Mark 72 armor that has been teased. Now, while the cane that we saw Iron Man create in the previous issue, I was of the belief that maybe the armor was that cane, that he would be able to tap that cane a la Thor style and the armor just appear on him. And while that turns out to not necessarily be the case, because as we learn in this issue, the Mark 72 is not done yet. However, that cane that we saw in the previous issue does wind up in the possession of the Kingpin. It was hinted that maybe Kingpin didn't know about the lab that he had built or was using inside the Hellfire Club, but considering that Wilson Fisk is bankrolling all this, I guess it does actually make sense that he did know about it, because we see the Kingpin is inside of his lab in this issue, so there was no secret there. However, it seems that cane was actually for Kingpin, which I know a lot of people I saw on social media and even in the comments for the video that I did for Invincible Iron Man number 11 thought it was really weird that, you know, Tony Stark was gonna have this powerful weapon, a weapon that's nearly as strong as adamantium. It's as strong as secondary adamantium, but almost as strong as actual pure adamantium, and is completely invulnerable to magic. Like, it seems like such a strange thing to give to Tony Stark, let alone the Kingpin? Yeah, that one's kind of weird. But we're also going to be seeing other people getting access to these things as well, because as we saw, well, you know, the Mark 72, once again, not done, not completed. We have not seen it yet. We won't see this until it's ready to be done. So we're just gonna let Tony cook here. We know that he hasn't forgotten about his old pal Rhodey. Rhodey, as you know, has been in prison as of late, especially after the events of about maybe, I think it was 2 or 3 issues ago of Invincible Iron Man, where Tony and Rhodey were trying to infiltrate an Orchis facility where the Sentinels were being created, and Rhodey was discovered, and in order to cover Tony's tracks, Rhodey stayed behind and basically offered himself up as the sacrificial Negro to Orchis, more or less, and he's been in prison ever since. And while Kingpin has spared no expense to help Tony keep Rhodey alive in prison, mostly by paying off other supervillains, characters like the Living Laser and Sandman, to intentionally get themselves locked up just so they can keep an eye on Rhodey, we also know that She-Hulk has made a valiant effort in order to try and get Rhodey set free. But that's not going to work out either, because the lawyers that are prosecuting Rhodey, as well as the judge who is overseeing the trial, they're all bought and paid for by Orchis, the judge especially. And while the judge never actually says anything that would, you know, tip off that he's bought off by Orchis, you have to look no further than his judge's bench, where you see the orchid sitting on the edge of the bench. That is very much a hallmark of Orchis. This is just a little way to let you know that Rhodey's name is Pitt, and he ain't talking his way out of this shit. But all that aside, the thing that is of note is that while he's not set free, Tony has not forgotten about him. He has sent him a little care package, a medallion, so to speak, one that is no different from a patron saint medal. Only it lets you know that the prison guards are either not paid well enough to give a damn or are just incredibly stupid. But when they look at this medal, it's very clear that it has an Iron Man in place of a saint, which would let one know that maybe, just maybe, this might be something more than what it appears. But they don't look into it. But what we now know is that Rhodey very likely has a medallion around his neck that will grant him access to the War Machine armor and allow for his escape. Because I think it's safe to say that Orchis is never going to allow him to get out of prison. So they're gonna have to bust him out of prison. And with that said, he's gonna need something to do it. While Kingpin has Sandman and Living Laser and so on in there with him, this medal very likely gives him access to a new and improved War Machine armor, one that would very likely have all of his typical heavy weapons artillery, maybe even some new gadgets for him to use, one that is, as I stated before, almost as strong as adamantium and invulnerable to magic. So yeah, this is very much what you probably think it is. And considering that the next issue is titled The Mysterium Man, I think it's safe to say we'll finally see the Mark 72 armor made of Mysterium and Iron Man in all of its glory. Now, before we get out of here, instead of doing the usual YouTube spiel for this video, and since Thanksgiving actually comes up in this particular issue, let's take a moment to just be thankful. In the spirit of Thanksgiving, I hope that you are all having a safe, happy, and wonderful holiday, regardless of whether you celebrate it or not. I know I, for one, am thankful for each and every one of you, Earth's mightiest subscribers, so I just wanted to take a moment to let you all know that. I hope you all are staying safe, happy, and sane out there in these streets, and most importantly, keeping it plus ultra. There will be no episode of Nerds of Culture this week because we do those on Thursdays, and Thanksgiving is on Thursday, so I will see you all for the Blerd Cave this Saturday. Until next time, Bamf.